So this morning's message I've titled Faith in Action. It has to do with our faith. And I want to begin by opening with just a couple questions to kind of get us thinking a little bit. When is the last time that you shared your faith with someone? Have you shared your faith with someone? Why or why not? Why don't we share our faith very often? We all want other people to like us, is often a large part, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do the opinions of others matter? Why do you choose that number? When we look at faith and culture, when we look at the two, they appear to be on either diverging tracks or on a collision course. It's kind of one way or the other. They're either so completely opposed or they're coming together to a head where it's going to crash. That's the way it kind of looks today. And when we look around and we see the news, there's chaos. Chaos all around us. If you look just to the north of us, look up at what's happening in Canada. There's pastors being arrested just for holding church services. The world around us today is seeking to gain attention in good ways or bad. It's pushing Christians, though, ever farther into conformity with a modern worldview of religion. We're getting pushed kind of into a corner as Christians because we're being pushed into obscurity, being called, especially Bible-believing Christians, we're being pushed into being a fundamental group, being pushed into a fundamentalist group. So what does the Bible have to say about living our lives and sharing our faith? In the world, we've all heard this phrase, we're to live in the world but not of the world. We've all heard that. That's a line that many of us Christ followers that we use when we think of how to deal with and how to live in our culture with things like art, music, movies. But it's really a pretty abstract concept. How are we supposed to be part of the conversations that the world around us is having, but without getting entangled into that mindset? How do we be involved without becoming wholly encompassed by it? And the Bible says that there will be some tough things about avoiding that entanglement. 1 John 2:15 says that do not love the world or things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Sorry, John, there's no slides for this one. But if the love of the world, the love of the Father is not in him, if we love the world. What does it mean, though, to love things in the world? Can we love playing? Can we love sports? Can we love hunting? Can we love video games? Can we feel passionate about pizza? I love pizza. Who can we be friends with? Who should we be friends with? Or if you're younger, who should we date? If you're not married, who should we date for that matter? Are some people off limits because of how they talk, how they dress, how they act? Our example in this, as in everything, we have to look to Jesus. We have to look to Jesus. And how did he relate to the people around him? Jesus did not remove himself from culture in his day. He was part of the conversation. He was the friend for those who needed him. He loved people who were far from biblical standards. He loved those who were not living righteous lives. He brought truth and love to the broken corners of this world. But as he engaged his culture, though, Jesus never left the will of his Father. Jesus never bowed to the pressures of the world because his focus was always on what his Father wanted. And maybe that's just the first step to unpacking this difficult issue. As we engage our cultures and connect with people around us through music, through film, sports, arts, whatever else people are interested in, our focus, though, needs to stay on what is it that God wants? What does God want? If we think of it this way, before you, if you're on social media, before you post something to a social media, so Instagram, for instance, if you're posting something on Instagram, and this is for most of the younger kids and younger generation, before they post something to Instagram, what's the first thing that they do? You find a filter. You find a filter, right? Something that makes you look a little better, something that maybe is fun. So the first thing you do is you pick a filter. The picture that you post is still the same filter. The filter changes everything about that picture. If you think of Snapchat as another one. So you can put filters on where you have like dog ears or your tongue sticking out, or you can do all sorts of fun stuff. But the picture is still the same at the roots, but the filter determines it adds something to that picture. That's how we should interact with the culture around us. Everything we do must be filtered by our relationship with Jesus. That means that we'll see movies, music, relationships differently than people without that filter. Paul tells us that part of our mission is to engage culture for the sake of the gospel. As we read the following passage, I'd like you to think about what Paul's words mean for us today. And we can open our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And we'll read verses 19 through 23 together. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Beginning in verse 19. It says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." We're to help those around us come to know Jesus by more than just our words, but also through our actions. What are some ways that we can do this? How do we live our lives? Basically, how do we live our life with our faith in action? The first thing is to not hide. We shouldn't be hiding. The world, when we look in the world and all the craziness that is happening in the world, it's easy for us to want to just hunker down, to hide, especially out here in a small community where it's not as close around us. It's not as close, but it is coming. But it's easy for us to say, "Oh, that's in Missoula. I don't have to worry about that out here," or that's just big city problems. But it's coming. It's much easier to ignore those things. It's easier to stay comfortable. Or since it's so easy to give into temptation and to become the things that we hate, some people think that it's easier to just shelter ourselves, to stay away completely, to avoid friendships, to avoid interactions that might cause us to question or to stumble. Other people choose to hide their faith by giving it very little mention outside of the church building. It's that idea of, I come to church and I know God, But then once I leave the building, what's the point? I go and I pay my dues on Sunday morning, but then I leave, and what's the point after that? I did my good deed for the week. Many of our friends, perhaps, may be surprised to even know that we have faith. I know in my early Christian life, that was definitely true for me. Many people didn't even know that I even had faith. But in that, we need to be courageous. We need to be courageous in our faith. The danger and the evil is exactly what we're seeking to engage in our culture. As we saw in 1 Corinthians, that Christ followers are called to go into the world, and change it from the inside out. Not just try and force things in from the outside. I think that's one of the problems, for one, of trying to change something by, for instance, like political changes, doing things, forcing things that way. It'll never work, because change can't come from the outside. That just feels like oppression. It has to come from within. Christ followers, we're called to go into the world, I said, and change it. We change it from the inside out through relationships, and that's exactly how Jesus engages us. He meets us where we are. He shows us love. Even though we're still sinners, he changes us from the inside out. Romans 5:8 says, "But God shows us his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." We have a job to do. God has called us to a mission. He wants us to go into the world to share the love with the people that he loves, to share him with people who need him. We can't love the world from afar. Even if we put our own comfort at risk, we must jump into the mess for the sake of the broken and the lost, because we have a job to do. Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Go therefore, disciples. That's our commission. That's our job. We have the best message, though. We have the best message. We must care about the lost, because when Paul first got into the city of Athens, this is a story in Acts 17, what did he see? He saw a city of idols all around, and it says he became distressed. It bothered him that the citizens were worshiping things other than God. So did he shake his head and move on to a more reputable city? No, he didn't. He went into that synagogue, he went into the marketplace to share the good news of Christ that city desperately needed. And because of this, there were people that were interested, that wanted to know more. And eventually he was able to use one of their idols, an idol to an unknown God, to point them to the one and only true God. We have to worry about the right things. Paul wasn't worried about taking a chance, but he also wasn't concerned with being popular. When he was preaching in the marketplace, some people thought that he was just babbling irreverently. But there were some, as I said, that wanted to hear more. So they took him to share his message with a group of people who enjoyed hearing the greatest ideas. Even when he spoke to these enlightened people, though, many of them laughed at him. They sneered at him. Paul knew they needed to hear about Jesus. They needed to hear about Christ's love more than he needed to be liked. And God rewarded his faithfulness when a few people followed and believed. So we have to take our faith and go into the world. When we go out from here on Sunday mornings, what ways can we be involved with the people around us in our community? The people that we work with, the people that we see each and every day. Are we to stay comfortable by only doing things with other Christians? Or should we actively engage the unbelieving world around us? I think the answer there is pretty clear, because that's what we're called to do, is to engage the world around us. But we're to be salt in the world. As we engage the world around us, we're to take care not to lose our excitement for Jesus. We're in the world to transform it, not to get lost in it. And if you were like salt, when we add salt to food, what does that salt do in your food? Does the salt begin to taste like the food? No. The food tastes like the salt. When salt is added, it doesn't taste like the food. The food takes on the salt's flavor. Matthew 5:13 says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." We are salt and light in the world. Paul, in Acts 17, he used some strategy. When Paul engaged the people of Athens, he was strategic. He knew the culture enough to find the places where his message would gain an ear, where there would be people willing to listen. So the synagogue, the marketplace, the Areopagus, the place where they gathered to debate, they were all places where new ideas could be shared. So Paul was bold, but he was also smart about how he shared his message. How can we be bold and yet strategic in engaging our community and engaging those around us? If we are assuming that we are right, that others are wrong, we have a bigger problem, though, than the idea of just engaging a disagreement over concepts of human life. Because as Christians, oftentimes we have the outside influence that we're supposed to be nice. We're supposed to be nice. There's Vodi Bakum, if you've ever heard of him. He's a great big black guy, does some apologetics, and he calls it the 11th commandment. The 11th commandment, thou shalt be nice. There's no such thing as the 11th commandment, of course, but we feel like we need to be nice because of how threatening religion can seem, especially to those who see themselves as a minority. People who believe that God is unknowable, if he is there at all, in a land of disbelief. There's people that tend to regard evangelicals as just moral police that are determined to impose their ideas and proper behavior on other people who do not share their beliefs. That's what we're up against. And it's difficult to understand how people inhabit the same society and can have such different perspectives, different understanding. A greater question, though, is what have Christians done to make the good news sound like such a threat? First of all, we don't have to do much to make it sound like a threat, because it is a threat to the darkness, because it is Jesus. But in our actions, I think there are, throughout history, Christians have done so. We have made the good news sound like more of a threat. Part of that has to do with history. Part of it has to do with the nature of the message. If we look at John 12, you can turn there with me, John chapter 12. Verse 18. John 12, beginning in verse 18, says, "The reason why the crowd went to meet him was that they heard he had done this sign. So the Pharisees said to one another, 'You see that you are gaining nothing. Look, the world has gone after him.'" John 12, verse 20. "Now among those who went up to worship at the feasts were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.' Philip went and told told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told